Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. My name's Dr. Eleanor. I'm really pleased to be presenting today. My talk is entitled Against the Grain of Corporate Hype, Strategies for Critical and Grounded Teaching about the Impact of Generative AI on Learning, the Environment and Society. All opinions are my own, but they're based on evidence, plus 19 years of teaching in higher education, as well as a lot of research I've done since 2005 into AI by practice. So the first thing I want to talk about are these provocations. They are provocative. Following the Epstein scandal, is it time to recognise that leading AI corporations, the 5 or 6 or 7, which arguably dominate the world, are closer to criminal cartels than respectable businesses? Could we argue that those universities and schools and other organisations and businesses which encourage the use of generative AI are in fact useful idiots, corporate greed and corruption, and worse, for various coups and military actions and acts of reckless endangerment and colonial takeover? In your opinion, should a chatbot trained to be racist and misogynist, such as Musk's Grok, which declared itself to be Adolf Hitler at one point, shortly before it was given a huge military contract by Trump's administration, should they be allowed anywhere near schools and universities? And I include in that ChatGPT. There is plenty of evidence that all large language models are entangled with racist, sexist, hateful othering, which reflects the source of their data and what their owners agree with. Do students realise that the very high error rates, lack of traceable provenance such systems represent? Do students understand that? Do colleagues understand that? My experience of testing large language models is that, unlike a calculator that should, if you say what's 2 plus 2, should always give you the answer 4, large language models may occasionally, or quite often, give you a completely erroneous answer. So it's nothing like a calculator. It's a probability machine, and often those probabilities are inaccurate or wildly incorrect. Lecturers like me are increasingly noticing student essays with made-up citations, fake references, generated by ChatGPT, large language models. Are students told that this is unacceptable or highly likely when using AI by their universities, those permissive universities that say that it's fine to use generative AI, that the output's fine? Do they tell you that it's highly erroneous? Not only that, generally generative of awful, worse than average writing, I would say. Is this something that you're aware of? Might be the question I'm asking. The term cartel is really interesting. In fact, here I wanted to see what Gemini would make of the suggestion that AI corporations are more like cartels, and it gives us it's scraped a fairly reasonable, if misleading in some ways, description. So critics and regulators, including those in the UK, France and the EU, warn that a handful of firms, are the most powerful firms in the world, are forming a de facto cartel by controlling the entire AI value chain. There's a citation there. Resource gatekeeping, developing leading AI, whatever that means, dominant AI, requires vast amounts of proprietary data, specialized computing infrastructure like GPUs, and they say elite talent, all of which are currently dominated by companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Meta, and Palantir, companies that we don't hear so much. Well, we hear a little bit more now that there's conflict, but we used to not hear enough about them. Vertical integration. These firms often act as both the suppliers of essential cloud infrastructure and direct competitors in AI model development, creating bottlenecks that can exclude new players. That is a cartel. And they've been scrutinized. And even in 2025, AI firms were warned that they must not become a private cartel for giants, emphasizing a need for transparency and open data. So just to remind you, cartels form agreements among producers to control supply or manipulate prices, impacting markets by restricting competition and raising prices. While they aim to benefit members of the cartel, cartels often harm consumers. Legal status varies, but many regions deem them illegal due to anti-competitive practices. So I leave it to you to decide whether you think these huge corporations are running criminal cartels. AI as a cartel, if we start to think of it as a corporate cartel, does exactly what it's designed to do. Consolidate power to a handful of corporations, reinforcing, in the case of American AI corporations, extremist, patriarchal, white supremacist ideology and exclusive wealth. That's their purpose. AI corporations have shown us again and again they will liche, cheat, tell us anything to increase profit and maintain power. They will beta test, that means things that are not ready, really, which should be tested in much more controlled, safer environments. They will beta test technologies that are unfit for purpose on children and adults alike. They have zero care about education, the climate crisis, war, or basic human rights. Their care is for profit and unimaginable wealth, often built on the backs of global majority workers with terrible conditions. These are just two articles I find, but you can find them every single day, and you can research the true conditions of workers who moderate images, who look at images of violence and things that are traumatizing, as well as other work. That's a huge array of jobs that are necessary, including getting rid of toxic e-waste, usually dumped in countries like Ghana, causing great damage to the population there. AI CEOs from the most powerful corporations are deeply entangled with extreme racism and hatred for women. Elon Musk questioned whether women can think, as reported by Madawi 2024. Zuckerberg wants more masculine energy in technology corporations. Why does Mark Zuckerberg want more masculine energy in the corporate world, as if it wasn't dominated by masculine energy? It's because the patriarchy is still in charge. Worse than a patriarchy, it represents a tiny minority of vested interests. Otherwise, says Zuckerberg, the corporate world was becoming culturally neutered. Culturally neutered. What does that tell you about the culture or the values that they wish to promote through their technologies? The Epstein scandal is an opportunity to remind ourselves of the circles that many of these CEOs are mixing in, and they are both abusive, hateful towards women, exploitative, but also, perhaps even more worrying, deeply entangled with racist white supremacy, ideas about the climate crisis, which they deny and fund Trump in denying, but at the same time they know that the planet is getting warmer, and their hope is that it will wipe out 1 billion people from the global majority, because they're white supremacists who think only white DNA should survive. Sorry to say such despicable words, but this is on the record, and that Elon Musk is on the record Zekiling at the inauguration of President Trump, meaning that he is a white supremacist fascist. These long-termist transhumanist philosophies, championed by other influential figures in these circles, particularly in the AI circles. Joshua Bark, whose work on cognitive architectures and machine consciousness has shaped advanced AI research, influenced figures such as Elon Musk, appears in the Epstein documents, engaging Epstein in sweeping discussions about race, hierarchy, genetic engineering, the supposed utility of mass death, including under conditions of climate stress. So what might terrify us, because of its damage to other human beings, is a utility, is useful to them, with no compassion whatsoever, to those countries most vulnerable to climate change, which are generally the global majority, countries of the global south. So another philosopher, Nick Bostrom, moved through these same intellectual and institutional ecosystems. His published arguments on eugenics, selective population strategies, and existential optimization reveal a parallel strand of thinking within that milieu, financed and legitimized by many of the same networks. Both men were also financed by Epstein. Taken together, the Bart correspondence and so-called long-termist ideas, these supposedly philosophical values that the AI leaders have, which are about exterminating the majority of us. They circulate in the environment that shows that human hierarchy, population thinning, and genetic destiny were not fringe provocations, but part of the ambient intellectual air inside the circles designing the next generation of AI. When AI discriminates, when AI reduces, when AI leaves out some of us who are never represented by it or defamed by that representation, and when it replicates racist output, misogynist hatred, that is part of its design. Individual developers may not agree with that, but the CEOs who run these corporations, such as Musk, certainly have deliberately designed chatbots that replicate their own racist ideologies. Sam Altman is very keen that most of us, the median human, that's you and I, who is not multi-billionaires, apologies to any billionaires that are in the room, we should be replaced by AI. We have no role in life. We should be allowed to become extinct or worse, wiped out deliberately by the impact of climate crisis. Altman's narrative naturalizes the concentration of immense power within entities like OpenAI, frames complex societal transformations through a techno-deterministic lens, and subtly promotes a form of government that risks deepening existing inequalities under the guise of democratization and progress. How cynical is that, to disguise these hateful eugenics as democratizing progress? The patterns of discrimination so deeply embedded in generative AI are not accidental biases. The CEOs of the 6 or so major American AI corporations are funders of Trump's far-right, nationalist, racist, misogynist ideology, abusive ideologies. Their desire is control and power, whether it's over education, health, war, work, energy, you name it. They want to control it. They want to dominate it. They want to make more profit. They have no expertise in education. Their goal is to dominate, to make teachers redundant, and to turn students into passive consumers of products, not thinkers, originators, or makers. This far-right circle in America has made it very clear they despise universities, they despise education, which makes people critical, which includes the global majority. So I see, and what I'm going to talk about is a constellation of AI harms. I no longer find it useful to only focus on one aspect, whether it's bias, whether it's misinformation, education. I think we have to also talk about health, military conflict, flattening, colonial flattening, racism, hatred of women. We have to talk about all of these things because they are in many ways inseparable. And if for some crazed reason I said AI is amazing for education, if it destroys the planet we're living on, then that any benefit is null. So in 2024, Apple produced this video, which they rapidly withdrew, but I think it was a tell. I think it was a great accident that they showed us their true values, and values which I feel are very familiar within all of the AI corporations. I don't think it's particular to Apple. I think the mistake was that they've revealed the ideology underpinning the impetus to produce, to dominate us with artificial intelligence and with big technology corporations. So I'm going to play it. Let's have a look. Hope it will show. I'm going to make it big. This flattening of all those beautiful musical instruments, things we care about. They're revealing there, I think, the true agenda and actually, accidentally, the true impact of particularly of generative AI and corporate power, this massively dominant corporate power, there was an outcry about it, and they very, very quickly withdrew that advert. It's quite hard to find, I had to search for it. But there we go, a flattening of culture, a flattening of difference, a flattening of the richness of our material life, our textured reality, into one shiny little iPad. This flattening literalized into the flattening of cultures which the far right, American far right racists seek to obliterate. This is the next era of military strategy and military technology, said David Leslie, Professor of Ethics, Technology and Society at Queen Mary University of London, who has observed demonstrations of AI military systems. He warned that reliance on AI can result in cognitive offloading. Humans tasked with making a strike decision can feel detached from its consequences because the effort to think it through has been made by a machine. And on that Saturday, 165 people, many children, were killed in a missile strike that hit a school in southern Iran, according to state media. Bombing quicker than speed of thought. What use to that? To humanity is bombing quicker than the speed of thought. We might also notice the Financial Times ran its horrifying article about the Tony Blair Institute and its plans for a post-war Gaza that envisaged kick-starting the enclaves economy with a Trump Riviera and an Elon Musk smart manufacturing zone. So you can see it on the map here, how entangled it is with the fantasies of big tech dominance, with Tesla and Amazon Web Services in an area which once had many, many hundreds of thousands of human beings and a culture, a thriving culture. On the health front, the NHS must concentrate on the basics of cancer treatment. This was a letter by oncologists in the United Kingdom, more or less begging them to prioritise cancer care basics over tech and AI magic bullets, will risk the health of thousands of patients. In a paper published in the journal Lancet Oncology, 9 leading cancer doctors and academics say the NHS is at a tipping point in cancer care, with survival rates lagging behind many other developed countries, while we splurge money on using large language models, which are known, in this example where GPs have got enormous pressure and other practitioners to transcribe, and social workers to transcribe conversations with patients and clients. The evidence is clear now that these systems downplay symptoms in women and ethnic minorities. They reflect biases that can lead to inferior healthcare advice for female, Black and Asian patients. But at the same time, the NHS in the UK would be charged for that, charged to deliver us discrimination. Britain's reliance on Palantir, the controversial US surveillance firm, is a gaping national security vulnerability, MPs and tech experts have said. This journal called Nerve, set up by brilliant Carol Cadwalader, reveals how deeply embedded the company is in the UK's critical national infrastructure. The Nerve's investigation shows the company, co-founded by one of President Trump's most loyal allies and evangelical, apocalyptic, born-again Christian, who believes that Greta Thunberg may be the Antichrist, has said this, encouraging her murder, I would suggest. Peter Thiel is enmeshed in Britain's civil and defence structure to a far greater degree than previously realised. The Nerve has found at least 34 current and past state contracts across at least 10 government departments, local councils and police authorities, including the NHS. And it appalls me that this murderous white supremacist should have anything to do with Britain's infrastructure. And I would be appalled by any other country that would want anything to do with any of these AI corporations that are a risk to their sovereignty and their national security. On the other front, of course, there are terrifying scope for misinformation. And here, a doctor saying that there are fake videos of him created by generative AI, as if he's promoting a completely bogus cancer cure, just another aspect of the danger, whilst at the same time other writers actually question the narrative of great scientific progress that AI corporations are very keen to promote, and are very keen to seduce artists in particular into sort of providing that narrative for them. There is great doubt that there has been any significant breakthrough created by AI. We're just serviced with propaganda 24 hours a day. Dwayne Munro says that of all the empires that have stalked the earth, the tech imperium is perhaps the bullshittiest. The Romans derived their power from myths, yes, but also roads, aqueducts, and organised violence, real things in a real world. The US empire has its own set of myths, such as a belief that sitting in a car in traffic is the pinnacle of freedom and meritocracy, a notion wielded by the most mediocre minds to explain their comforts. Once again, however, real things such as possessing the world's reserve currency and the capacity for ultra-violence lurk behind the curtain. The tech empire, by contrast, is built using the monorail maneuver detailed in the Simpsons episode where this con artist comes into town, on false claims prettily presented. It has inserted itself between us and the things we need: information, memories, creativity. The tech industry has hijacked a variety of commons and then rents us access to what should be open. So ChatGPT isn't a research platform or the herald of a new age of computation. It's the embodiment of the revenue stream dreams of the tech industry, the super rentier, and it seeks to rent out education, or what it calls education, what I would call drivelling rubbish, to all countries in the world. That's its dream, and it will stop at nothing to obtain that. Dagmar Monnet and Gilbert Packett write, in The Commodification of Education, AI-induced scam-like culture. Learning is hard. Mastery takes time, and time ripens all things. This may seem appalling in an age where instant gratification offers quick ways to write a thesis and get a degree without bothering to master a topic. If so, what about intellectual and academic integrity? What about the evaluation of learning? What about the quality of information provided by generative AI systems? Like all sectors, education has experienced a crisis of legitimacy, amplified by the ultra-fast and widespread adoption of generative AI. What's the point of spending several years on a school bench if it can pretend to know in seconds? This scam-like culture did not pop up out of nowhere. Its origins can be traced back to Silicon Valley, where fake it till you make it, as design thinking ideology, has become a globalized motto nurtured by the gospel of tech solutionism. If there is still no sign of a revolution of AI in education, it's only in the media and corporate outlets. We are witnessing a corporate AI coup, a digital stratagem to reclaim triumph in an already devastated sector, an attempt to appropriate leadership, taking over educational institutions, decision-making by promising solutions to systemic problems that are not solvable by them. So this paper demonstrates that by many different examples. If there is an AI revolution in education, it is the accelerated commodification of education at any cost. And this paper shows a different, much needed path forward. AI, for many of us, represents an anti-democratic infrastructure. And this paper by John Moravec tells us what we can do about it. There's an additional layer of concern. The Brookings Institute's Rebecca Winthrop warns that student dependence on AI can produce cognitive stunting, and argues that educators should impose guardrails to protect student development. Yet cognitive development is not the only democratic risk. Students can work hard and still lose agency if private systems control what information surfaces first, what gets compiled into the answer, and what topics are forbidden, or engagement is limited to generality, or without audit rights or meaningful notice regarding data sources or quality. The system behaves as a black box, and we absolutely do not understand whether the information, so-called information, comes from a conspiracy site, from amateurs, from a deliberate propaganda, or is a useful source. We cannot generally understand that within the mathematical model. People sometimes say, oh, well, humans are racist, humans are biased, so of course AI is going to be that. But this really excellent research by Nicoletti and Bass for Bloomberg Technology, I highly recommend you look at it. no, this is not a simple response to the situation. It's not just replicating racism of some humans, etc. It's amplifying, it's reinforcing the nature of where the data has been collected, and a regression to the mean, to the average, means that if it's scraped from conservative middle American sources, it will reflect conservative middle American, sometimes apocalyptic, extreme white supremacist values. And if it's tweaked by white supremacists to amplify their values, then we're in an even worse situation, as it appears to be. Large image data sets as well, when we're talking about it, we talked about language models, but large image data sets, when built without careful consideration, say Behin and Prabhu, of societal implications, pose a threat to the welfare and well-being of individuals. Most often, vulnerable people and marginalized populations pay a disproportionately high price. Some heartening news research that I've done with a group of colleagues led by Dylan Yamada Rice in primary schools, this here a primary school in southeast London. These children, about 8 or 9 years old, they actually had quite canny questions to ask about who makes AI, who owns AI. A couple of the children said that if those people were racist, then it would reinforce racist ideas and be really bad for communities. I thought they had real insight, and it was refreshing to see that. Here they were drawing masks about what they thought AI was, and it helped us when they wore them that we could take photos and preserve their anonymity in that way. But I thought they were really smart kids, and it was really heartening that they had good critical questions. They had a great teacher who was also technically accomplished, as is often the case. People who understand technology are more critical about, can be more critical, sometimes not critical, but they can also be the most critical in my experience. About statistics, about reductionism, about the idea that quantities of things can express everything there is to know about our life, about other life, non-human life, about existence. Aubrey Clayton, in his paper from 2020, How Eugenics Shapes Statistics, reminds us that statistics is at core a manifestation of racist eugenics, and the main players in it were proud eugenicists. They believed in the superiority of white DNA, and their statistical processes were often deployed to try to prove correlations, say, between race and IQ. All these questionable hard and fast categorizations that many of us absolutely would define as pseudoscience. It would be convenient, Clayton says, if statistics existed outside of history, but that's not the case. Statistics as a lens through which scientists investigate real-world questions has always been smudged by the fingerprints of the people holding the lens. Statistical thinking and eugenicist thinking, that's the belief that some people's genes are superior to others along supposedly racial lines, white supremacist thinking, are in fact deeply intertwined, and many of the theoretical problems with methods like significance testing, first developed to identify racial differences, to construct racial differences, are remnants of their original purpose, to support eugenics. And sadly, eugenics has come back in a big way with, as we saw from the implication of Epstein in being part of this circle of eugenicist thinkers. UNESCO has a really good study showing alarming evidence of regressive gender stereotypes. And I highly recommend reading their paper. It's a very frightening study, and really important we understand this, how it reinforces the worst kind of stereotypes that we've spent years trying to get rid of. This idea that your future is determined just because of a construct of gender or a construct of race. The research here that claims that AI can help fix the climate crisis are absolutely dismissed as greenwashing. There's another argument I've heard time and time again, based on zero evidence, AI industry is going to is accelerating the climate crisis faster than we could possibly imagine at the worst possible moment in human history. We're guzzling more finite fuel instead of saving it, instead of seeking alternatives. But unfortunately, natural energy supplies are not good for training models because the fluctuations, unlike in our own house, if the light dips for a second, it doesn't matter. If you're training a model and it breaks that, hundreds of millions of dollars are lost. So they can't use wind power, they can't use solar power. The research commissioned by non-profits here, Beyond Fossil Fuels and Climate Action Against Disinformation, did not find a single example where popular tools such as Google's Gemini and Microsoft's Copilot were leading to material, verifiable, and substantial reduction in planet heating emissions. Quite the opposite. It's deliberate misinformation, lies from AI corporations. Here's a really good film showing weak evidence of benefit, strong evidence of harm by Ketan Joshi, Climate and Energy. Highly worth watching that. Here we see the difference between old-fashioned Google search, pattern matching, and AI-powered so-called Google search. Massive increase in the use of finite fuels. What's different about generative AI is the power density it requires. Fundamentally, it is just computing, but a generative AI training cluster might consume 7 or 8 times more energy than a typical computing workload. And we have to remind ourselves that AI-powered Google search, which is very hard to turn off unless you go -AI, capital letters, before you search, that's a way to turn it off, apparently. It is not searching through the web, it's not searching through a database, it's generating probabilities based on its mathematical model. It's wasting fuel every single time Google, by default, generates a response to a prompt by splurging power on these really expensive fuel guzzling probability generators. Really great work from Kate Crawford here. This map, it's not just what you see on my screen here. If you click on that or look up anatomy of an AI system, you can keep zooming in at the material infrastructure required to keep an Amazon Echo working. An immense amount of materials, humans, plants working, extraction, abstract, algorithmic, but also requiring power cables, water, materials that make wires, that make server centers. This one as well, cartography of generative AI. You can keep zooming in and look at the immense infrastructure, extractive infrastructure, using finite resources. And here in the middle, well, not in the middle, but a tiny map of Africa where one of the continents, particularly the country of Ghana, where massive waste dumps of toxic digital leftovers, e-waste, are shipped over. Here's the boat taking it to dump it on Ghana, which can only cope with a very small percentage of that waste, whilst it leaks into the water table and is associated with cancer and other terrible impacts. Data centers here, it's well known now that Ireland's energy is increasingly being taken and used for maintaining data centers, which are also related to cancer clusters and other health issues. They require a massive amount of water to keep cool. This film by More Perfect Union, we went to the town Elon Musk is poisoning. It's a massive AI data center poisoning Memphis. It's burning enough gas to power a small city with no permits and no pollution controls. Because there's one thing the far right like is deregulation, and Trump's deregulated in a very large way. In fact, there's a moratorium, an end to being able to put regulations against AI corporations. Trump wants that to be for 10 years, that there is no restraint whatsoever on AI corporations. Residents tell us they can't breathe and they're getting sicker. More Perfect Union's mission is to build power for working people. Here's what that means. We report on the real struggles and challenges of the working class from a working class perspective, and we attempt to connect those problems to potential solutions. We report on the abuses and wrongdoing of corporate power, and we seek to hold accountable the ultra-rich who have too much power over, in this case, America's political and economic systems, and very keen to get power over other people's systems as well. So back to education. It's part of this constellation, and I can't disentangle it. What would an educator be like if they focused on education but didn't mention that a system might poison you, or might give you cancer, or might lead to white supremacists wanting to murder you? What would that mean to be an educator and to only focus on, say, writing essays? It would mean a very weird atomization, which is in fact reinforcing the atomization of statistical processes. We've lived through decades and decades now of repeated digital promises, says Audrey Watters. We'll be faster, stronger, more connected, what have you. And none of the computational fantasies have really come to fruition, certainly not for everyone. We are not more productive, despite now being asked to work so much more, clicking away on our devices at all hours of every day. We are not smarter, and most importantly, we are not better. A tiny group of men are, on the other hand, now richer than any other humans have ever been in all of history. So there's that. Our public institutions are crumbling, in no small part because these men are fully and openly committed to the failure of democracy, having positioned themselves to profit mightily from years of neoliberalism. AI, in question, in sarcastic marks the further, and they hope final, consolidation of their power. Not just the privatization and monopolization of all information under their control, but the automation of the dissemination and replication of knowledge. These men are more than happy to sell a story, a system that trains all of us, but particularly young people, to become entirely dependent on and subservient to computational machinery. They are more than happy for us to sacrifice our cognitive capabilities, our creativity, our agency, our decision-making, our morality, to solidify their crude oligarchical dreams of total efficiency, total financialization, total domination. Sasha Rogelberg says that the main learning technology initiative distributed 17,000 Apple laptops to seventh graders across 243 middle schools. By 2016, those numbers had multiplied to 66,000 laptops and tablets distributed to students in Maine. King's initial efforts have been mirrored across the country. In 2024, the US spent more than $30 billion putting laptops and tablets in schools. But more than a quarter century and numerous evolving models of technology later, psychologists and learning experts see a different outcome than the one King intended. Rather than empowering the generation with access to more knowledge, the technology has the opposite effect. Earlier this year, in written testimony before the US Senate Committee on Commerce, Science and Transportation, neuroscientist Jared Cooney Horvath said that Gen Z is less cognitively capable than previous generations, despite its unprecedented access to technology. He said Gen Z is the first generation in modern history to score lower on standardized tests than the previous one. Now, while skills measured by these tests like literacy and numeracy aren't always indicative of this notion of intelligence, they are a reflection of cognitive capability, which Horvath said has been on the decline for the last decade. Also, this is really horrifying. So back to Watters, who says, there will be no AI tutor revolution, just as there was no MOOC revolution, massive online courses, just as there was no personalized learning revolution, just as there was no computer-assisted instruction revolution, just as there was no teaching machine revolution back in the 1960s. If there is a tsunami, it's not technological as much as ideological, as the values of Silicon Valley, techno-libertarianism, accelerationism, and now white supremacy are hard at work in undermining democratic institutions, including schools. The history of failed edtech startups and edtech schools is long, and yet we're trapped in this awful cycle where investors and entrepreneurs keep repackaging the same bad ideas. So, arguably one of the most affluent countries in the world, Sweden, has recently started to return to more traditional ways of learning. And this is a response to politicians and experts questioning whether Sweden's hyper-digitalized approach to education, including the introduction of tablets in nursery schools, has led to a decline in basic skills. Sweden's Minister for Schools, Lotta Edholm, who took office 11 months ago as part of a centre-right coalition government, was one of the biggest critics of the all-out embrace of technology. Sweden's students need more textbooks, she says. Physical books are important for student learning. The minister announced in August that the government wanted to reverse the decision by the National Agency for Education to make digital devices mandatory in preschools. It plans to go further and to completely end digital learning for children under 6. Really, really interesting. What's my response as an individual? This is often, as an academic, as an educator, people often ask me this: what do I do that's positive? And it's a really reasonable question. And I think I've always tried to make my own research and my own teaching grounded in a suspicion, a criticality, an evidence-based criticality around the claims made by corporations which I know wish to make money and wish to increase their power. So I've always tried to make my own classrooms critical. It's very difficult in a neoliberal milieu, in an era where corporations are believed to be almost inseparable from our own individual goals and needs. Corporations, in neoliberal terms, are the same as what we need, but I disagree completely with that. So I've tried to develop courses, as well as my individual classes, that provide space to question this dominant avalanche of hype, of adverts, of pro-AI propaganda. And in July, this course is going to be running. It's called Teaching and Learning Critically in Age of Generative AI. You can look it up if you like at Cambridge Data School, sorry. And I particularly try to focus in materials and materiality and the reality that AI is costing us the earth. Same with the Social Data School, where we dismantled some smart devices and tried to trace their provenance with the help of an amazing group called SOMO. And I think it was a real eye-opener for many of us to realise just how plugged into systems of exploitative extraction many components are in laptops, even from corporations which try to project a squeaky clean image. We discover that they're using lithium, that they're using cobalt, but they're using minerals that can end up coming from countries with conflict minerals, where children may be fighting, where children may be working down mines, as well as adults working in extremely exploitative conditions. And I'm really inspired by Jussi Parikka. It says that instead of thinking of media not from McLuhan's point of view as extensions of the human senses or extensions of man, as they usually describe, but rather as extensions of Earth. Computational media now participate in geological and climatological processes, from the transformation of the Earth's materials into infrastructures and devices to the powering of these new systems with oil and gas reserves. Reflecting on media and technology as geological processes enables us to consider the radical depletion of non-renewable resources required to drive the technologies of the present moment. Each object in the extended network of an AI system, from network routers to batteries to data centers, is built using elements that required billions of years to form inside the Earth. This is from Kate Crawford's book, Atlas of AI. She says we need a theory of AI that accounts for the states and corporations that drive and dominate it, the extractive mining that leaves an imprint on the planet, the mass capture of data, the profoundly unequal and increasingly exploitative labour practices that sustain it. These are the shifting tectonics of power in AI. A topographical approach offers different perspectives and scales beyond the abstract promises of artificial intelligence or the latest machine learning models. The aim is to understand AI in a wider context by walking through the many different landscapes of computation and seeing how they connect. We cannot afford to pretend that these systems are not material. Maybe the millionaires, billionaires can, but we can't. She uses this term atlas, and I really like it. It's in contrast to traditions which position data and AI as godlike and ungrounded, unconnected to the earth, to the materials and labour involved in them. And we use this framework, and Alexander, my colleague at Cambridge, and I, of earth, labour, data, affect, state, classification. It's a really good reminder that these systems are structural and material, and a useful reminder that they require economic and physical resources, energy and water. It is not abstracted, it has ground truth. And this was the model we used for our own teaching in the social data school last September. We'll repeat this, looking at a phone not just as a phone, but also as labour, as platforms, as minerals, metals, and other materials, as data centres, and then to deconstruct that with students, with participants, to understand the materiality, the labour, the extraction, the connection to many of the topics I've talked about. And SOMO, which is this brilliant organisation, the Centre for, sorry, go back a bit, the Centre for Research on Multinational Corporations, based in Holland, Lydia and Anzana helped participants to, they had access to special databases showing the provenance of some of these materials, showing how they were transported, showing how conflict materials can be sort of illegally breaking embargoes, breaking agreements about not using child labour, about not encouraging children to have to fight in wars, to keep the price of coltan low, for example, which is to the advantage of big tech corporations and is present in all our phones. They're really brilliant colleagues, and it was exciting to be part of investigations where we discovered at least one conflict mineral in one of the phones we dismantled. So I see this as affirmative critique, this curriculum that I've designed, really as a counter to the pervasive lack of criticality that I experience in higher education. There are pockets of criticality, but overwhelmingly there's a kind of passive inevitability, sense of inevitability, of weakness in the face of that which cannot be challenged. But I disagree completely. So Anne Alexander is evolving ways to teach about AI without using AI, which is really important to emphasize how serious the ecological and global impact of the AI infrastructure is. Sonia Ferradouni teaches social justice-oriented coding, and Abdullah Hassan Safir's workshop explores the impact of generative AI on the global majority, particularly looking at images from Bangladesh. Matt Mahmoodi investigates AI-driven surveillance. I teach critical data visualization and also drawing as a way to understand dimensionality reduction, to question the scope of statistical generalization by practice and theory. Applicants to the data schools often seem to assume we're offering a form of promotion for AI technologies, as if they cannot imagine a world where OpenAI and Google, etc., are not promoted. This makes sense given the pervasive neoliberalization of education. Just a reminder, that means the idea that educational needs, the needs of learners, are not separate from the needs of corporations, which is insanity. And I think some colleagues fear seeming to look out of date or uninnovative or non-trendy, as if regressive AI algorithms are anything but always out of date, always looking back at data that is already out of date. Unfortunately, critical discourse about AI is often shut down by senior management in higher education. That's my experience and experience of many, many colleagues I've spoken to, because they have been taken in by AI hype. They may even be entangled with corporate funding structures, and they may also lack critical or technical understanding or any depth of knowledge about AI. We have to do better than them. We have to do better than those vice chancellors who do deals with AI corporations, not thinking about the impact on students or on the environment or on non-human other animals, or really able to understand the impact on those of us who are minorities of systems which repeatedly replicate discriminatory information, discriminatory ideas. So the course is aimed at educators as well as students, and in sort of responding to the question of what do I do, I want us to share our thoughts, our practices, our worries, and our experiences, I want us to evolve critical understandings and responses to the hype that has engulfed education and everywhere else, as far as I can see. We don't use AI except to interrogate its use of finite resources, its errors, and cultural flattening. It's not just a tool. As I hope I've shown you, it represents hateful ideologies that for the majority of the world's population is an extreme danger to their ability to thrive and survive. So it's a creative space to have discussions, which too many colleagues are shut out from by leaders, so-called leaders, who fail to take seriously these very, very negative impacts of generative AI on teaching and learning and our fragile ecosystems. It's a hands-on course with exercises in drawing, social justice understandings of coding, world building, thinking about the worlds we do want to inhabit and thrive in, haunted photogrammetry, phantom frames and animated apparitions, looking at, in some ways, as AI is hauntological, always haunted by the past, always regressing to the past which many of us dread. It's critically affirmative after Ben Williamson. Affirmative critiques are focused on finding a practical path to change, to find partners and devise strategies and approaches that resist or operationalise alternatives. The course consists of 2 days on campus in Cambridge, an online day, and 2 further days on campus. All sessions must be attended. If you're interested in applying, please do. I absolutely encourage it, and I would be delighted to review your application. This is some of my own drawing, my own comic zine making practice, and I encourage students to regain confidence in their own creativity, in their own criticality, in their own minds. Teaching about AI should never, ever replicate corporate adverts and should not occlude wider structural material understandings. But unfortunately, some colleagues can also be seduced by corporate narratives of personalization and efficiency. As a counter to that lack of criticality, I really encourage you to read these fantastic texts. There are many more, but these are really brilliant ones. I also have a book coming out this year with my wonderful colleague and friend, Professor Dylan Yamada Rice. It's called Extraordinary Methods and Methodologies. And it's part of Advancing Methods for Interdisciplinarity in the Social Science. We're really excited about it. It took us a long time to write, and we're drawing upon many of the teaching strategies, creative practices, arts-based research, practices research, which grounds knowledge in our relationality, in our bodies, in processes, in materials. And it's been kindly described as a beautifully written and evocative book. It provides a response to the current challenges of simplification, neoliberalism, and right-wing thinking, which seeks to silence any modes of resistance. The theory and concepts included in the book provide innovative ways to think differently about creative methodologies and methods. The authors share examples from their research that act as thoughtful provocations, taking the reader on new lines of flight, traversing new worlds, and opening up novel ways of thinking and doing creative research. A must-have book for those interested in new and speculative ways of research and researching. So thank you to that reviewer in particular. Thank you to both, or all of them, actually several reviewers. So there are many, many different ways in which we can exist without this corporate product. We're talking about a corporate product. We're talking about corporations that have run out of ideas, that have nothing going for them now, apart from this crazy hope. First it was cryptocurrency, now we have generative AI, and next it will be quantum computing. They'll move on to another hype cycle, believe me, and they don't care what happens to students along the way, or educators. So I really hope you realise the significance of this constellation of AI harms and think deeply about the long-term damage to your life, to your ability to thrive, which I seriously believe AI corporations represent. Many thanks indeed for your time, and many thanks to Ivy Taslima and all the colleagues for inviting me to talk.